There's an opportunity now for anyone who has questions to raise them for all or individual speakers. Are there any questions in the room? At the back. Hold on one second. Let's see if we've got a microphone that can come to you.
My question is for Mario Carpo. Well, first of all, I really enjoyed your paper. I really appreciate your optimism on regard to your argument. As you mentioned that the images are, the reproduction of the images is decreasing. I appreciate that. I think it's a very optimistic argument. Nevertheless, I would like to impose a little bit of a question to that argument, and it's, you know, that within the liberal system, crisis, basically, every sort of momentum is incorporated into, let's say, a new style. And I'm wondering, for example, if the neutrality as a style that we're having right now, all the architects to show one of the pictures of the website in which everything was basically just the address of the architect. But I'm wondering if this new neutrality is actually more becoming a new style in which, you know, it just proves that a liberal system incorporates crisis within it.
Yes, this I agree. It's a very good remark and a pertinent one. We always find ways to adapt ourselves to a new balance between, to a new techno-cultural environment. And style is, I think, often the manifestation of this new adequacy which we manage to fabricate to make a new use or to make the best use of technological change or the change in the cultural technologies which we use for communication. There was a rhetoric which was invented for speaking, and then it had to be adapted to have a rhetoric made to measure for communication in writing. And then there was a new rhetoric which tried to make sense of communication in writing and print, and then communication in writing and print with printed illustration added on top of that. And we write differently, I presume, when we know in which format and using which technologies our alphabetical scribing will be reproduced. We would not compile an entry for Wikipedia in the same style as we would compile an entry for the Encyclopedia Britannica. We know that an entry on Wikipedia is open to permanent and open-ended interactivity. And indeed, there is a style of Wikipedia entries which is already quite perceivable. If you read a Wikipedia entry, it does show that it is the result of many manipulations from different people, each one with their own agenda. This, in a sense, creates a style, because, anecdotal remark, I know one person who wrote her own Wikipedia entry. And she wrote it in a way as to emulate the style of Wikipedia, as if that were the result of 1,000 persons intervening on those 10 lines. So we can assimilate a new style, and we can, of course, work with it. Now, in the case of images, how we shall manage to find a new balance and a new equilibrium with a new technical condition, which is determined by these two factors. An extraordinary amount in the number of available images, together with a complete drop of their individual significance. So we have so many more images, of which each one is worth so little. Evidently, we shall find a way to work with that. I don't know how and when this will happen, but inevitably we shall work that out. Only Images are no longer what they used to be, and if we think they are, we are cheating ourselves and our constituencies. This is what we should keep in mind.
Another question? Brian Hatton.
Perhaps. Okay. No, okay. Right.
My observation concerns the emphasis on writing here as opposed to simply words, because in addition to pointing out that architecture didn't seem to need images or got along without images until the 15th century, Joseph Rickwert also pointed out that it pretty well got along without treatises as well, and there was an oral tradition of architectural transmission. So we can say that while architectural work, building and making three-dimensional images, sculpture and painting have all proceeded, they've always been accompanied by words, but not necessarily by writing. Now, it seems to me that the changes that have just been described also apply to the question not just of images, but of writing itself, because of the way that discourse proceeds by speaking live, in Skype, in all kinds of ways. And therefore the relation of architectural discourse to writing seems to me to be changing just as much as it is towards images.
He looks at me. I think that's okay. No, you're right that actually what Mario described about the status of the image today also applies to the status of the writing, and we should not, I think, confuse words or this kind of indexical traces with writing, and especially with discourse, because I think what I was trying to also to describe with Alberti, that the text was not just some words to explain the building or the drawings or the design, but the text was actually to build, to construct a certain idea of architecture, a certain idea of a city, a certain idea of a society. So in this sense, I think there is the question has to be posed also in relation to writing and discourse, and whether still writing can construct, can be part of that process of construction of a statement, of a position, of certain ideas about the practice, and in this sense becomes part of practice. In the examples that you showed with the images, I think it's more writing is being reduced to just some words or titles or subtitles, but it doesn't have any other function, or it's not, definitely it's not a discourse, what we would say discourse. So it's not, doesn't create a debate, and it doesn't produce a space for a debate.
Can I add something onto that? Because I was also intrigued by your paper and really enjoyed your argument, which I think is really compelling. But it made me kind of wonder whether you were making the argument that the images are no longer truthful, whether the implication then is that words are more truthful. So which I would certainly disagree with, but I'm not sure whether you are saying that. It seemed more like it kind of became an implication, but...
This is a good point, and it would be a footnote in... the point is that the technological change today is not making words either more or less truthful than they have always been. In fact, if something is happening, it is making them less truthful, because from the frozen reliability of print, we are moving also with alphabetical text to the permanent variability of hypertext. But what is happening in the domain of alphabetic writing is very little if we compare it to what is happening in the domain of photographic images. Because there, with images, we have lived for a few centuries in a domain, in a world, where images were predicated on their inherent reliability. And this has gone. So in this case, on one side, the story is of a climax and sudden decline, whereas for the alphabet, it still works more or less as it always did, in spite of Wikipedia.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, I think what's really important about it is this argument that the relationship between words and images that Marina set up for us to discuss is something that changes historically, and that with the particular this particular moment and the technological changes that's had, in your argument, more impact on images and their relationship to the original than perhaps it has on writing.
May I have a question? May I ask a question myself to one of you? Just to go back to what I've listened to your readings and I saw your pictures, but when the book is printed, does the reader find the same pictures? What is in the book? I don't know. I don't have your book.
Yeah, okay.
Please
an interest for me is the relationship between printed writing and performance and speech.
Different
And so
formats.
they're constantly changing. So in the book, it's a particular configuration of that. So there is one image that you would see, the image that was static, and then all you have is text. And with the other piece, each time it gets published, it's a different configuration. So it changes a lot.
So the format for this audience is inspired by the book in print.
Yes.
But it is
but then remade for
staged.
this stage
Staged.
in a particular way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Eve Lomax.
Okay. I think your argument, for me, really opens up the question of what constitutes truth, right? And yeah, it's okay, is it? I've got a very long history within visual art, particularly photography. Okay. Yes. And one of the strong debates has been particularly about this question of truth, right? And the notion of truth that a certain notion of photography and perspective brought out, right? So my first question is, what is that truth that we've lost, right? And why would we want to hold on to it, really? And I think the other thing is that, I've worked across writing and producing images, right? And producing images through a range of different materialities. And something that I came to that was actually really important was the notion of affect. How something affects you, right? And I think one of the very strong moves in, should we say, writing after criticism, the only way I can put it, has been understanding that criticism and debate actually happens through affect. And I don't mean affect just through emotional gushy, gushy, gushy. I don't mean that at all, right? But it's actually thinking, words, images deliver affects, right? And that's probably their power. Anyway, that's my...
I could make a quick response to it. I'm sure you'll want to talk about truth, but yeah, the second is mine, the first is yours, exactly. For me, one of the things that I think would be nice to kind of bring out as well would be about where writing is located. So I think the difference between writing being located next to the visual material in the architect's description of the intended work is very different from the writing that appears later, that's part of the critical discourse after the production of the work. And I think perhaps this issue of writing after criticism is particularly pertinent to criticism. But I also think, and that's been a very, very productive debate in recent years between art and architecture and design, also performance studies, and has, I think, beginning to really transform criticism in those areas. I think that's really happening in architecture now, actually. But I think it then poses some very interesting questions about how architects use writing in the design process as well.
Robert Maxwell?
I have a problem about truth. I do think truth is a very important thing. Truth is what we believe words convey. And we used to think that pictures, images, conveyed truth called special effects, what we used to call special effects. But truth is a problem. Truth is a problem because I can't imagine any art being any good if it's not done with conviction. And conviction means you're believing in something, but it can't be what is true. So there's a difference between truth and conviction, which always bugs me and continues to bug me forever. When I think of the image, how Sarkozy's back could be changed, and how the image is not necessarily true, it's also the fact that words are not true, and yet words, which can be used instead of fighting to bring people together, are the things that divide us the most. Why otherwise do the Shias and the Sunnis disagree so violently between each other? It's a form of words that separates them. So words are very, very treacherous things. They don't lead us to the truth any more than images lead to the truth. And we've got to understand that we're all sort of existing in a sea of rhetoric. And rhetoric blurs all the edges. Rhetoric is the only means we have of communication, and yet it works through blurring the truth. When we get around to that, there might be some possibility of getting onto a world in which nobody believes in the afterlife, or eternal life, or God, or anything like that, but we do actually understand each other better and therefore work better together.
Thank you.
That was well said. I don't think
Yeah,
we can add
it's the
anything.
last. No.
Yes, a question behind or next to Robert Maxwell.
Do you think when it comes to images, they also kind of portray a certain intimacy that's probably the reason why they need to be there? I mean, words could do the same, I guess, but... So did you get my question?
No, not
Could you
really.
repeat it, please?
I'm just wondering if images are essential in the sense that they portray a certain intimacy.
He said the images are important because they portray a certain intimacy. Yeah.
For example, if you're looking at the image of a parametric script, and you're looking at the image of a certain drawing made by an architect, you know, the meanings that are derived from that can be very interesting.
I would say there's an issue around distance and affect, but I'm not sure that I would want to say that, you know, that the images are more intimate than words. I think it would depend on the technology at play in some ways. But I also wanted to. I really enjoyed what Bob said, but I'd also say Derrida's coming to mind in his critique of Saussure, and wanting to emphasise the importance of writing because of its deferred status, and the critique of Saussure for arguing that the spoken word is somehow closer to the truth. And then there's and the problem that he had about writing being somehow seen as kind of deceitful because it didn't have this closeness to the spoken word. So I would say there would be a danger in thinking that because writing could be rhetorical, fabrication and so on, that somehow that's viewed in the negative, because I also think it can be viewed in the positive. I would say that writing is generative and inventive as well.
And actually, if writing is a fabrication, then that's how writing can be critical. You know, going back to the question of criticism, and if we are after criticism or before, I don't know. But also going back to Bob's last note on rhetorics, that rhetorics actually blurs the boundaries. But I think it's exactly the point, that blurs the boundaries, but blurring boundaries, that means that you need also to define what these boundaries are and how are to be blurred. And then in one way that's part, in my view, part of writing as critical practice. So to constantly define these boundaries and how they can, the relationships can be reconfigured. And I think in your text it seems that actually images and textual elements, they have similar function. They become part of that process of the construction of the discourse, of a narration.
Yeah, I suppose what I've tried to do, but I don't know if it's fully successful because it's something that really puzzles me, is the use of images, and perhaps not wanting to use them solely to illustrate words, but actually recognising that they play their own, they have their own performative power. So sometimes, and I thought it was great in your presentation when you you purposely didn't show images and left the screen blank, because actually words make images too. And often if you remove the visual element of a picture rather than a textual element, you allow the words to perform, to create the visual. So I think for me, I'm not sure whether I've got anywhere near where I want to sort of get with it, but it's about trying to play off exactly your point about what you see and what you read, and trying to play with those relations. And that's why I have to say, I think that some of the more interesting formats for architecture writing actually exist in the format of things like artist books, and that there are real restraints in academic publishing. You mentioned the constraint of whether you can actually get the image or whether you're told how to use images because it's going to sell more books. And that actually removes the sort of freedom of playing with the word and the image to create this sort of hybrid meaning.
I think there's a question just here.
So I just had a quick question here. I wanted to say that following on from Mario's question to Jane, that I think it was very lucky to have your performance today, because I see the difference between the reading process and actually being here and listening to you. So I'm very grateful that you came and that we were able to experience that. I'm sorry I laughed at your comment, your political comment. It was more out of shared desperation than anything else, to be honest.
I felt that.
Forgive me for reducing things away. I want to just take things away from the theoretical for a moment. It was just something you said at the end that I was kind of interested in, which was about the space in ex-council estates. I was just, I think you just mentioned at the end there that a lot of them are now kind of boarded up and disused, but I think quite interesting to look at actually how they are being used. On my estate, there's a newly opened public space which is used for after-school activities and for internet for people who don't have Wi-Fi at home. My friend has moved into a flat with a boarded-up room next door that she has the right to buy, so she can extend her council flat into that space. Another friend has illegally appropriated a boarded-up space next to her flat, so she's currently trying to sell that. Be interested to see how that goes. And another friend runs a local theatre group out of an old public space. So I think it's interesting to see how the kind of this flexible kind of loose space that now exists in these public buildings, in the public estates, is being used and appropriated. Obviously, sometimes there'll be economic reasons and political reasons, and sometimes people are left and able to appropriate them in a slightly more unofficial way.
No, I could talk for hours, perhaps we will, about the use of these spaces. In the block where I'm living, what would have been the old laundry rooms in a 23-storey block they're completely glazed but locked off. So these sort of empty rooms that have just got dust, literally rolls of dust over the floor. And I'm really interested in the idea of some kind of vertical garden within the block. So I think depending on the configuration and what the different councils do, in other places I've seen that they've taken what would have been creche spaces and collective spaces and actually then selling them off as housing. So there's a whole series of potentials there that I think are really interesting to investigate. And part of what also interests me is, I think, to do with this relationship of writing between maybe the intimate and the public, that there's, the experience that we have in reading a book is a very intimate and private experience, but I'm really interested in the role that writing can have and the audiences that it can reach beyond I think the pedagogical point is an important one, and perhaps we can come back to that throughout the day. But I think beyond the teaching institution, or beyond academia, or beyond architectural theory, I'm really interested in the public role of writing and what it can do to, in terms of helping to revitalise these spaces. So that's why I'm kind of thinking that the next phase of this work might be a performative installation. But I'm also interested in something like the form of the novel as a way of having a more kind of public writing. Yeah.
Thanks.
Perhaps one more, and then we.
Should we have one more and then Brian and then... Yes, a student and then...
Yes, yeah. Roberta.
Thank you. I was just wondering, to what extent do you think that the idea that digital photographs are not indexical anymore, in the sense that they have no direct relation to truth and to reality, how much is this idea actually acknowledged by practicing architects? For instance, if we look at the way in which architects present their work, it's normally through images. And another curious thing which happened to me when I was gathering some material for a publication was that some of the works in publication were under construction. And so the architects tended to give me like the drawings or renderings of the work, and then telling me, oh, like, don't use these images because we are gonna get the photographs and they're gonna be taken by the same perspective as the drawings, so it's gonna be the same thing. So in one way, it's like the photographs are like more truth than truth. You know, they add that bit of truth to the work of the architects. So I don't know, what's the relationship there? How the photographic image works?
That was exactly my point, meaning that until a few years ago, we could tell a rendering from a photograph. A photograph was documental evidence, or we assumed it was, or something which was really out there. Now this separation does not exist anymore. And I am waiting for the day, which sooner or later will happen, when we shall read in a newspaper, Le Monde or ever, a review of a building which doesn't exist. Because it may have happened already, because we all work on images and we can no longer tell, is that building built? Is it being built? Is it halfway? Will it ever be built? And sooner or later, some critic will fall into a trap, and they will write a full piece on a building which would never exist. And I'm waiting. It has happened, yeah. And the other way around, it has happened to me to go see a building just built, just inaugurated, of which I knew only the images which had been sent around in a very controlled, authorial way by the architects, and finding out huge discrepancies between the image I had in my mind based on the images I was given and what the building looks like. And in at least one case, I investigated the matter, and I could find out in which subtle and intelligent way the images had been doctored to improve or to edit the image of the building. It was done on purpose. It was an intelligent manipulation of the only images which had been sent around of the building prior to its inauguration. And so, yes, we are all playing this game, and at some point someone shall have to pay the price, because that critic which will write a review of a building which does not exist, you will end up in the history books.
Brian, last question.
I hope it's not me.
But that's, sorry, just to say, that's why I wanted to make the argument about situated criticism, so that actually we start to draw out these distinctions between what it means to, say, write an essay that would only be of a photograph and what it means to visit the building. And that's not to prioritise phenomenological criticism at all, but it's to take into account these discrepancies.
We must bear in mind that each picture today has gone through endless layer of automatic or deliberate processing. It was always so, but prior to digital images, it was a laborious process, and it always kept a trace of the original indexicality of the way the picture had been made. Now this is no longer the case.
I wonder if it's possible to reverse the order from where index works from what was said to be the original, the real, or the actual, and reverse it in terms of telos, where everything must move towards the real, or towards a goal, which is actuality. Now, it seems to me that the digital modality requires something like the mathematizability of things. In Tom Stoppard's play Arcadia, the character Thomasina observes that if there is a mathematical formula for a bell, then there must be one for a bluebell flower. And if there's one for a bluebell, then every fractal form must have its mathematizable form. Now, there's a great difference between the algebraic formula for a parabola and actually experiencing a parabola as a drawing or possibly as a dome. And so therefore this issue of affect comes into, it's the point at which things become existential again, rather than experiencing things as the mathematical formula or diagram and so on. It seems to me, therefore, that just as Clement Greenberg pointed out that painting had to differentiate itself from photography in so far as each art in Kantian terms must move towards that which is actually its own. One can imagine a situation where architecture is restated as precisely that which can never be simply an image of itself. In the two cases you gave, the Will Alsop building, which is actual, might be said to be actually less real than the photograph, in the sense that it was never meant to look real. It was always meant to look like an image, whereas the guy who was making the image, although I didn't particularly believe that one, might well be really wanting to give you an impression of a real building, and it's in a sense a more naive construction than Will Alsop's.
That's a good
I remember when I first went to America, I'd been very impressed with pictures of certain kinds of American formalistic architecture. But I remember the moment very precisely in front of a Kevin Roche building in New Haven. I'd got to within about 300 yards of it, and I was approaching it, and I realized I didn't need to go any nearer to it, because there was nothing more there. It had been invented already as an image, and as something which basically was most real in its photographic form. As I got nearer, nothing was added. You know, I learned nothing new about the building, really, apart from possibly the internal diagram of it.
But then
Yes,
you cannot
yes,
go
yes.
close. You know, that's a very secure building. Try and get close and they shoot.
But the point I'm trying to make is that it seems to me that the recent emphasis on materiality, on phenomenological experience, on atmosphere, as Zumthor uses the word, I think he must surely mean Stimmung in German, is something like, is there some residue which is beyond the digital, beyond the mathematizable, which is something like the actuality of an architectural experience, because the one thing that can be said of it about an image, as opposed to words or a mathematical formula, is that it does have in common with the telos, the final telos, the ultimate telos of a building, that it is actually something to be seen. Of course, the building offers something more than to be seen, which is to actually be fully experienced existentially in time and through smell and other senses.
I mean, I would respond to that. I think they're fascinating points, and it's not a direct answer, it can't be, but it is just riffing off it, which is more that I find it kind of fascinating that when we try and grapple with experience in architecture, we are pulled back towards the building and somehow pulled back towards debates around phenomenology. And for me, what I found really interesting and why I've always sought to work in quite an interdisciplinary way is that the debates that come out of, say, performance studies will value things like documentation as an experience in itself, that isn't that the original performance, if you like, doesn't have the priority, that the documentation is also to be experienced. And for me, I guess what I find fascinating more fascinating about writing than perhaps image making, but perhaps it's because I am a writer more than an image maker, is that the process of writing can be a remaking of the building, and it's in that remaking process that the kind of critique occurs. So it's trying to maybe destabilise the authority of the experience of the building in some way. That would be where I'm trying to head in what I'm doing.
And writing can be more multi-sensorial than images, which by definition are limited to sight. And one reason of the dominion of the eye, or visuality, from the Renaissance until 10 or 15 years ago, or perhaps still today, is that the impression of the eye could be recorded and transmitted. Whereas, for example, there was no comparable technology to record smell or touch. But
I must
Perhaps we should
arrest the discussion at this point and thank our three speakers, Jane Rendell, Mario Carpo and Marina Lattery. Thank you.
It's not the end.